Welcome to Michigan in Focus. I'm Bruce Walker, Great Lakes Regional Editor for the Center Square. And joining me today is the Center Square's Managing Editor, Tom Ganchard. What we're going to talk about today is kind of a reverse of course that the governor has taken regarding school resource officers in schools. So give us a little bit of background information on that and tell me where the governor stands now.
Let's start, of course, May 25th, 2020, George Floyd is killed in Minnesota. That sparked really a national conversation on the use of police in this country. At that time, it was roughly June, Governor Whitmer went on a podcast and said that she supported the spirit of defunding the police. And that meant that what some people took it meant is that, there was two schools of thought at that point. The one was the get rid of police altogether, defund the police. That's not what Whitmer meant. What she meant and what she later said was the spirit to defund the police in terms to take some money away from what you would put into policing and put it into other community services. And that is quit making, if you've ever looked at a state or a city budget, police are always among the highest, the most expensive department. Police officers are often at the city, county level among the highest paid employees because of overtime. It's very expensive. What Whitmer said back then was supports the efforts to take some resources away from police and divert it to community programs such as health programs, schooling programs, that kind of thing.
Well, sure. And the rationale behind a lot of that is if you nip criminal activity in the bud, then you won't have to require as much policing and as much jail time and what have you.
Right. And so what happened then is she controls the state budget, and the Michigan State Police are the police of the state, and gross appropriations for them in 2020-21 was $738 million. Since then, 2021-22, it's gone up to $829 million, and in 2022-23, $861 million. So she has not defunded the Michigan State Police. She's given them more money, significantly more money every year. So that hasn't happened. And then in January, she announced that she wanted to spend $25 million to support the hiring of 195 school resource officers, which are police in schools, and that would improve the safety and security. I'm sure there's part of that that's related to the Oxford school shooting, where a student killed numerous students in Oxford public schools. So, when you go back, it wasn't just, Whitmer that supported in 2020, defunding or the spirit of defunding the police. But there was also a bill July 30th, 2020, in the wake of the George Floyd killing, where they wanted the bill would have stopped federal funds from being used to pay police in schools. What we've seen is a kind of a flip where she talked about taking away resources from the police to divert it to other programs, non-police programs. But we've seen state police funding go up. And now what we see is another $25 million to increase the number of police officers in public schools.
There does seem to be not a terrific chasm or disconnect, but there's a modicum of a disconnect there.
I think the problem that she faces is the reality of the impact school shootings have on voters and whether police will help or not. You could make an argument that that in the school shootings that we've seen, police weren't a big help from media reports, going back to Florida, Texas. And so there's a good debate about whether having police in schools really makes a difference when there's a school shooter loose. But I think after the Oxford school shooting, that had a tremendous impact on the psyche of voters. And I think she had to act.
Sure.
And I think that's why she came up with the $25 million for additional police resource officers.
Well, does there exist any empirical evidence? If there's a school resource officer there, have any schools with those resource officers ever been attacked by a murderous rampage?
I don't know.
I'd roll the dice on this one and say probably not. So we don't know if it's actually going to serve as a deterrent as of yet, because we really haven't been that far down this path of school resource officers.
In Connecticut, this debate's going on. This year in Connecticut, there was a state bill that wanted to divert some of the responsibilities of school resource officers to other employees such as counselors, psychiatrists, that kind of thing. And it was very controversial because the school counselors are like, well, we're not police officers. What do we do? So it's part of this ongoing debate on, if you don't want police officers in schools, then, what are the other alternatives? What happens if somebody shows up and who will stop them? And also, how often do these shootings happen these mass shootings? The one in Oxford was first school shooting, the first significant school shooting of several students. You have to go back to Lansing in the 70s to find where a student randomly walked into a building and started shooting people, numerous people. There's been fights in parking lots after games that end up with a shooting, but, that's not really what this debate's about. What it's about is, this increase, or the believed increase, in the random troubled lone shooter who goes into a school. That does not happen very often. Okay. And you talk about, Michigan, there's a lot of bonds going up for schools to improve their school buildings and, make hallways curved so it's harder for a shooter to just walk unimpeded and have a clear line of sight, which could be seen as an overreaction considering we've had two major school shootings going back to 1970. So the impact of a school shooting is something that impacts everybody. So I think that's one reason why Whitmer had to come up with the, increasing the police presence in schools.
Well, sure. And I'm sure it has a lot to do with the fact that the victims in those shootings are innocent children. When you see the faces of innocent children, it tugs at your heartstrings. Tom, thanks a lot for joining me today to discuss this, and I'm sure you'll be keeping us abreast of the situation. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com for more stories by Tom Gantert. I'm Bruce Walker, Great Lakes Regional Editor for the Center Square. Please subscribe, and thank you for listening.